50 people watched, 50 people gasped, and 50 people did absolutely nothing. The moment Derek Mitchell's hand connected with his pregnant wife's face at her own baby shower, he made the biggest mistake of his life. Not because he struck a defenseless woman carrying his child, but because Evelyn Harper had a secret that would destroy everything he had spent 3 years building. She was not the nobody he thought he married. She was the hidden daughter of a $4 billion empire, and she had just decided to stop hiding. But here's where it gets twisted. Derek already knew who she was. From the very first moment, he accidentally spilled coffee on her laptop. Every romantic gesture, every whispered promise, every "I love you" was a calculated lie designed by professional con artists who had been hunting wealthy women for nearly 2 decades. What they didn't calculate, that the quiet woman they threw into the rain would rise up and burn their entire empire to the ground. Not with her father's billions, with her own 2 hands. The lesson this story proves one powerful truth. The silence of witnesses hurts more than the violence of the attacker. But the strongest souls learn to dance in the rain and then teach their daughters to do the same. If you've ever felt alone in your battle, if you've ever wondered whether fighting back is worth it, when the system seems rigged against you, this story is your answer. The pregnant wife he was divorcing had tears streaming down her face, but Evelyn Harper was not crying because her husband had just slapped her at her own baby shower. She was crying because she had finally seen the truth she had been hiding from for 3 painful years. And that truth was about to set her free in ways that would terrify every person who had ever underestimated her. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom had been transformed into a paradise of pink and white ribbons. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 50 of Charlotte's most elite society members. Silver platters held delicate finger sandwiches and miniature cakes. A tower of gifts wrapped in designer paper stood in the corner, like a monument to the perfect life Evelyn Harper was supposed to be living. But perfection was about to shatter into a million pieces. Evelyn stood near the gift table with her hands resting on her swollen belly. At 8 months pregnant, she moved carefully, protecting the daughter growing inside her. Her simple cream-colored dress hugged her figure elegantly, and her honey-brown hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked like any other expectant mother, celebrating the upcoming arrival of her first child. But Evelyn Harper was not like any other woman in that room. She was the only daughter of Victor Harrington, whose empire spanned banking, commercial real estate, media, and technology. His net worth exceeded $4 billion. And not a single person at this baby shower knew the truth about who she really was. 7 years ago, Evelyn had begged her father to let her disappear. She had been 25 years old and engaged to a man named Bradley Thornton. 2 weeks before their wedding, she had discovered that Bradley had been bragging to his friends about marrying the Harrington fortune. He had never loved her. He had loved her inheritance. The betrayal had broken something inside Evelyn. She had spent her entire life wondering if people saw her or her father's money. After Bradley, she finally had her answer, and it destroyed her. Victor Harrington was not a man who denied his daughter anything. When Evelyn asked to live anonymously for 1 year to find someone who would love her for herself alone, he reluctantly agreed. He gave her a modest trust fund under a different name, set her up in a small apartment in Charlotte, and promised to watch over her from a distance. That 1 year had turned into 7, because 3 years into her anonymous life, Evelyn had met a charming young man at a coffee shop. He had accidentally spilled his drink on her laptop, apologized profusely, and insisted on buying her a new one. His name was Derek Mitchell. He was building a real estate development company from nothing. He was handsome and ambitious and kind to waiters and strangers. He made Evelyn laugh for the first time since Bradley. She fell in love with his potential. She saw the man he could become, and she spent 3 years waiting for that potential to become reality. She never realized she was the only one investing in that future. Some women fall in love with potential. They see the man he could be instead of the man he is, and they spend years waiting for that transformation, never understanding that they were always meant to be the stepping stone, not the destination. The ballroom doors opened with a dramatic flourish that drew every eye in the room. Derek Mitchell strode in wearing a tailored charcoal suit that Evelyn had bought him for their anniversary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw cleanly shaven, his smile confident and charming. But Evelyn noticed immediately that he was not alone. His mother, Patricia, walked beside him, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo, her designer dress probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. Patricia Mitchell had never approved of Evelyn. She called her son's wife a nobody with no family, no connections, and no breeding. She tolerated Evelyn only because she believed the young woman would produce an heir for the Mitchell family name. But it was the third person in their group that made Evelyn's heart stutter in her chest. Brittany Cole walked 2 steps behind Derek with her hand resting possessively on his arm. She was tall and blonde and beautiful in a carefully constructed way. Her lips were too full to be natural, her cheekbones too sharp, her confidence too aggressive for someone who was supposedly just an assistant. Evelyn had suspected the affair for months. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way Derek's phone was always face down on the table, the way he flinched when she touched him unexpectedly. But suspecting and seeing were two very different things. Brittany's fingers traced small circles on Derek's bicep as they walked toward the gift table. Her eyes met Evelyn's with a challenge that needed no words. This woman was not hiding. She was announcing. Derek stopped in front of his pregnant wife with an expression that Evelyn did not recognize. His eyes held no warmth. His smile held no love. The man who had promised her forever 3 years ago had been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. "Shava," he said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, "I need you to come with me. We have something important to discuss." Evelyn glanced at the 50 guests, watching with curious eyes. Whatever Derek wanted to discuss, she did not want an audience. "Can it wait until after the party?" she asked softly. "The guests are here, and I should really stay to greet everyone properly." "No." Derek's voice was flat and cold. "It cannot wait." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The sound of paper sliding against fabric seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly quiet ballroom. "What is that?" Evelyn asked, though some part of her already knew. Derek smiled, but there was no joy in it. "This is your freedom, Evelyn, and mine." He thrust the envelope into her hands. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she opened it and pulled out the documents inside. The words swam before her eyes, but certain phrases jumped out with brutal clarity. Petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences. Plaintiff seeks full division of marital assets. Divorce papers. Her husband had just handed her divorce papers at her own baby shower in front of 50 witnesses. "Derek," Evelyn whispered with her voice cracking, "can we please discuss this privately? The baby is almost due, and I do not think this is the appropriate time or place to discuss our marriage." She watched his hand pull back. She watched it swing forward. She watched it connect with her cheek in a slap that echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The impact snapped her head to the side. Pain exploded across her face. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her burning cheek, her other arm wrapping protectively around her belly. 50 people watched. 50 people gasped, and 50 people did absolutely nothing. From across the room, a sharp laugh pierced through the horrified silence. But it was not a laugh of disbelief. It was a laugh of triumph. Brittany Cole stepped forward, with her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. The dress she wore had been purchased with money from Derek and Evelyn's joint account. Her eyes held a cruelty that matched the smile spreading across her painted lips. Finally, Brittany announced to the room with her arms snaking around Derek's waist, I have been waiting for 2 years to take my rightful place, but this pathetic little housewife just would not let go. Evelyn's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had suspected for months. But seeing Brittany draped over her husband at her own baby shower was a betrayal she could never have prepared for. The silence of witnesses hurts more than the violence of the attacker, because silence is agreement, and 50 people had just agreed that Evelyn Harper was worthless. Patricia Mitchell arose from her seat at the head table, with a look of disgust twisting her elegant features. But her anger was not directed at her son for his violence. It was aimed squarely at Evelyn. You worthless girl, Patricia hissed, as she marched forward with her finger pointing accusingly. You could not even keep my son happy. But you expect us to celebrate your pregnancy. This child is probably not even Derek's. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Evelyn opened her mouth to defend herself, to protest, to say anything at all. But Patricia had already grabbed her by the arm with surprising strength for a woman of her age. Get out, Patricia commanded as she dragged Evelyn toward the exit. You are no longer welcome in this family, but do not think for a moment that you will get a single penny from my son. The double doors burst open to reveal a torrential rainstorm outside. The sky had opened up while Evelyn was inside being humiliated, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for what was about to happen. Patricia showed no mercy as she shoved Evelyn into the cold, wet darkness. The pregnant woman stumbled down the marble steps with her beautiful dress immediately soaked through. Her heels slipped on the wet stone, and she fell hard on her hands and knees. Pain shot through her wrists. Rain pounded against her skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Her cheeks still burned where Derek had struck her. And inside her belly, her daughter kicked frantically, sensing her mother's distress. Evelyn turned back one last time to see Derek watching from the doorway, with Brittany wrapped around him like a snake. Patricia stood beside them with her arms crossed in satisfaction. The doors closed with a finality that echoed through Evelyn's hollow chest. She was alone. 8 months pregnant, kneeling in the rain outside a hotel where 50 people had just watched her husband assault her and done nothing. She had no phone, no purse, no way home, no one coming to save her. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her swollen belly and finally let the tears come. They mixed with the rain streaming down her face until she could not tell which was which anymore. She had entered her marriage hiding everything she was, and now she had nothing left to hide behind. But none of them, not Derek, not Brittany, not Patricia, not a single one of those 50 silent witnesses had any idea what was about to happen next, because the quiet ones are always the most dangerous to betray. And Evelyn Harper had been quiet for far too long. The rain pounded against the pavement, like nature itself was trying to wash away the humiliation that clung to Evelyn's skin. She did not know how long she knelt there in the darkness. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like eternities. The cold seeped into her bones until she could not feel her fingers anymore. Her daughter kicked again inside her belly. A reminder that she was not truly alone. A reminder that no matter what had just happened, she still had someone depending on her. Evelyn forced herself to take a breath. Then another. Then another. She would not die in this parking lot. She would not let Derek Mitchell be the end of her story. The sound of car engines broke through the curtain of rain. Headlights swept across the wet pavement, temporarily blinding her. Evelyn raised her hand to shield her eyes as three black SUVs pulled into the parking lot and formed a protective semicircle around her. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and a figure stepped out into the storm. Victor Harrington stood tall despite his 67 years. His silver hair was immediately plastered to his forehead by the rain. His tailored suit would be ruined within seconds, but he did not seem to care about any of that as he rushed toward his daughter with an expression that mixed rage with heartbreak. "Daddy." The word felt foreign on Evelyn's lips after 3 years of pretending she had no family. "How did you find me?" Victor did not answer immediately. He wrapped his arms around her trembling form and pulled her against his chest with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the fury burning in his eyes. "I have been watching over you every single day, sweetheart," he murmured into her wet hair. "I had hoped that boy would prove himself worthy of you. But tonight he showed me exactly what kind of man he truly is." He helped Evelyn to her feet and guided her toward the warm interior of the SUV. One of his security team produced a thick blanket that Victor wrapped around her shoulders. Another handed her a bottle of water. A third was already on the phone, presumably calling for medical assistance. Inside the vehicle, the heat slowly began to thaw Evelyn's frozen limbs. She leaned against her father's shoulder and let the tears come again. But these tears were different. These were tears of relief. "I watched everything through the security cameras I had installed in the hotel," Victor said, with his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Every moment of what they did to you is recorded. Say the word, sweetheart, and I will destroy Derek Mitchell by morning. I will crush his company. I will bankrupt his family. I will make sure he never works in any industry again." Evelyn listened to her father's words and felt something shift inside her chest. For 7 years, she had been running from his power. She had wanted to prove that she could survive on her own. She had wanted to find love without the shadow of billions hanging over her head. But sitting in this SUV, wrapped in a blanket, her face still stinging from her husband's hand, Evelyn realized something she had never understood before. She had spent 7 years trying to prove she did not need her father's protection. And in doing so, she had walked straight into the arms of a predator. "No, no, Daddy," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Victor pulled back to look at his daughter with confusion in his eyes. "No?" "Evelyn, that man struck you. He humiliated you in front of 50 people. His mother threw you into the rain while you are 8 months pregnant with his child." "I know," Evelyn replied, "and I want to destroy him, but not like this." She took a deep breath and met her father's gaze directly. "If you destroy Derek for me, I will never know if I could have done it myself. I spent 7 years trying to prove that I am more than your money. If you fight this battle for me, I will always wonder if I was capable of saving myself, and that uncertainty will follow me for the rest of my life." Victor was silent for a long moment. The rain continued to pound against the roof of the SUV like 1,000 impatient fingers. "Then what do you want from me?" he asked finally. Evelyn thought carefully before answering. She thought about the divorce papers in the envelope she had dropped somewhere in the chaos. She thought about the smirk on Brittany's face. She thought about the 50 people who had watched her husband assault her and done nothing. "Information," she said finally. "I want to know everything about Derek's business. Every deal he has made, every partner he has worked with, every secret he has tried to hide. But I will not use your power to destroy him. I will use what I learned to destroy him myself." Victor studied his daughter's face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, mixed with concern, mixed with a deep paternal love, that transcended words. "You have your mother's fire," he said softly. "She would have wanted the same thing." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone. "This is a secure line. Call me whenever you need anything. My people will provide you with whatever intelligence you request. But you have my word that I will not intervene directly unless you are in physical danger." Evelyn took the phone and tucked it into the pocket of her ruined dress. "There is one more thing," she said. "I need somewhere to go tonight, but not your mansion. Derek knows where you live. If I go there, he will know everything immediately." Victor nodded slowly. "Where do you want to go?" Evelyn thought about the one person who had seen through her perfect marriage facade. The one person who had encouraged her to leave long before things had gotten this bad. The one person who would not judge her for having a billionaire father she had never mentioned. "I have a friend," she said. "Her name is Rachel. She is the only person who knows how unhappy I have been. Take me to her." The SUV pulled out of the hotel parking lot and disappeared into the stormy night. Behind them, the Grand Meridian Hotel continued to glow with warm light. Inside, the baby shower had apparently resumed. Evelyn could hear faint music through the rain. Derek Mitchell was probably drinking champagne with his mistress right now. His mother was probably holding court among the society wives, spinning stories about the mentally unstable daughter-in-law who had finally been removed from their prestigious family. None of them had any idea that the quiet woman they had just thrown away was about to become the most dangerous person in their lives. Rachel Torres lived in a modest apartment on the east side of Charlotte. The building was nothing special, just a brick structure with an aging fire escape and a lobby that smelled faintly of pine sol. But to Evelyn, it looked like a sanctuary. Rachel answered her door in pajama pants and a faded college sweatshirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Reading glasses perched on her nose. A true crime podcast played softly from somewhere inside. At 38 years old, Rachel Torres had seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize them immediately. She took one look at Evelyn's soaked dress, her swollen cheek, and her haunted eyes, and opened the door wide without asking a single question. "Get inside," Rachel said firmly. "Victor, I assume your people can handle the security situation?" Victor nodded from his position at the bottom of the stairs. He had insisted on walking Evelyn to the door, but seemed to understand that this was a space where he did not belong. "My team will be monitoring the building," he said, "but they will remain invisible unless there is a threat." "Good," Rachel replied. "Evelyn, inside. Now." Evelyn turned back to her father one last time. "Thank you, Daddy, for everything, but I need to do this my way." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I understand, but remember, sweetheart, asking for help is not the same as being helpless. If you need me, I am only a phone call away." He turned and walked back to his waiting SUV. Evelyn watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then stepped inside Rachel's apartment and let the door close behind her. Rachel was already in the kitchen, putting a kettle on for tea and pulling leftover pizza from the refrigerator. "So, let me get this straight," Rachel said without looking up. "Your husband slapped you at your baby shower." His mistress laughed. "His mother threw you into the rain. And you are telling me that you do not want your billionaire daddy to end him?" Evelyn sank onto Rachel's worn couch and wrapped her arms around herself. "I want to end him myself." Rachel turned to face her friend with an expression that mixed admiration with exasperation. "Girl," she said slowly, "I have never been more attracted to you than I am right now. Sit down. We are making a plan." Rachel's kitchen table became a war room. By midnight, the surface was covered with legal documents, printed emails, and handwritten notes on yellow legal pads. Empty coffee cups formed a small army along the edges. The remains of reheated pizza sat forgotten in a cardboard box. Evelyn sat wrapped in one of Rachel's oversized sweaters with her damp hair finally beginning to dry. The shock was fading, replaced by something harder, something sharper, something that felt like the first stirrings of rage. Rachel had spent the past 3 hours asking questions, hard questions, the kind of questions that Evelyn had been avoiding for years. "Walk me through Dipchick's finances again," Rachel said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "You said he started Mitchell Development with almost nothing." "That is what he told me," Evelyn replied. "When we met, he was living in a studio apartment and driving a 10-year-old car. He said he had saved every penny from his accounting job to start his own company." Rachel frowned. "And within 3 years of marrying you, he is living in a 5-bedroom house and driving a Mercedes. His company is supposedly worth millions. That kind of growth is not normal." "I know." Evelyn stared at the coffee ring stains on the table. "I thought I was helping him succeed. I handled all the household expenses. I never questioned where the money was going. I trusted him." The word trust hung in the air like an accusation. Rachel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "My boss is coming over," she announced. "I hope you do not mind. When I told her about your situation, she insisted on helping." "Your boss?" Evelyn asked with confusion. "It is almost 1 in the morning. Maggie does not believe in normal business hours. She says justice does not sleep. So neither should the people fighting for it." 15 minutes later, Margaret Wells swept into Rachel's apartment like a force of nature. She was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her pajama pants were paired incongruously with a blazer, as if she had thrown on the first professional item she could find. "So," Maggie said, settling into a chair across from Evelyn, "you are the woman whose husband forgot the cardinal rule of marriage." "Which rule is that?" Evelyn asked. "Never hit someone who might have access to better lawyers than you do." Maggie smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I have been practicing family law for 30 years. I have seen every dirty trick cheating husbands use to destroy their wives, and I have made it my personal mission to turn those tricks back on them." She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a thick folder. "Rachel filled me in on the basics during the drive over," Maggie continued, "but I need to ask you some questions that you might not want to answer. Are you prepared for that?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good." Maggie flipped open the folder. First question. "You have been hiding your identity as Victor Harrington's daughter for 7 years. Does Derek know who you really are?" "No." Evelyn shook her head firmly. "I never told him. I wanted him to love me for myself, not for my family's money." Maggie exchanged a glance with Rachel. That glance carried a weight that Evelyn did not understand. Second question, Maggie continued. "Before you met Derek, did anyone outside of your father's immediate circle know about your anonymous life?" Evelyn thought carefully. "I do not think so. My father's security team knew. His personal assistant knew, but they are all bound by confidentiality agreements." Third question. Maggie leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Did Derek ever mention a man named Howard Crane?" The name sent a chill down Evelyn's spine, though she could not explain why. "Yes," she admitted slowly. "Howard was one of Derek's business partners in the early days. They had a falling out about 2 years ago. Derek said Howard was cheating investors and tried to frame him for it." "Why?" Maggie pulled a photograph from her folder and slid it across the table. The image showed a man in his late 40s with a receding hairline and an expensive watch. He was photographed entering a building that Evelyn recognized immediately. "That is the Harrington Tower," Evelyn said, with her voice barely a whisper. "My father's headquarters." "Howard Crane visited your father's building 3 times in the month before you've met Derek." Maggie's voice was calm but heavy with implication. "According to visitor logs, he claimed to be researching investment opportunities. Evelyn's hands began to tremble. What are you saying? I am saying that the accidental coffee shop meeting where Derek spilled his drink on your laptop might not have been as accidental as you believed. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. You think Derek knew who I was from the beginning? I think we need to investigate that possibility, Maggie replied carefully. And if it is true, then this is not just a divorce case. This is fraud, potentially criminal fraud. Rachel reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand. Listen to me, Rachel said firmly. Whatever we find out, it does not change what you need to do next. You need to document everything. You need to protect yourself legally, and you need to understand your rights. What rights? Evelyn laughed bitterly. Derek already filed for divorce. His lawyers are probably drafting custody motions right now. Maggie shook her head. You have more rights than you realize. In North Carolina, marital misconduct, including adultery and domestic violence, can affect property division. The slap he gave you tonight, witnessed by 50 people, is grounds for an emergency protective order. And if we can prove financial fraud, his entire asset division argument falls apart. But I do not have any money to fight him, Evelyn protested. I mean, I have my father's resources, but I told him I wanted to do this myself. I have been living on the household budget Derek controlled. I do not even have my own bank account. Actually, Rachel said slowly, you do. Remember last year when you mentioned you had been setting aside cash from the grocery money? Where did you put it? Evelyn's eyes widened. The lockbox. Under the guest room bed. I have been saving whatever I could hide for almost 3 years. It is not much, maybe $47,000. $47,000 is not nothing, Maggie said with approval in her voice. That is smart survival planning. That is the kind of thing women in controlling marriages do when they are preparing to escape, even when they do not consciously realize they are preparing. Evelyn absorbed this information slowly. She had never thought of herself as being in a controlling marriage. Derek had never explicitly forbidden her from working or having her own money. He had simply created an environment where she handled the household and he handled everything else. She had thought she was being supportive. She had not realized she was being isolated. There is something you need to understand, Maggie continued gently. Every woman who has survived a difficult divorce learns the same lesson. Information is ammunition. Before you file a single paper, before you hire a single lawyer, you need to learn everything. Bank accounts, business dealings, property records. All of this information is either public or legally discoverable. The more you know, the more power you have, and power is not given. It is taken. Evelyn straightened in her chair. The fear was still there, coiled in her stomach like a cold snake, but alongside it, something else was growing, something that felt almost like determination. Where do we start? She asked. Maggie smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. We start by finding out exactly how Derek Mitchell built his empire. Because, honey, in my 30 years of experience, nobody goes from a studio apartment to a mansion in 3 years without cutting some very serious corners. The 3 women worked until dawn began to lighten the sky outside Rachel's windows. They created lists of accounts to investigate, people to interview, and documents to request. They outlined a timeline of Derek's business growth and flagged the moments where his trajectory seemed too steep to be legitimate. By 6 in the morning, Evelyn had a plan. Not her father's plan, not Derek's plan, her own plan. And for the first time since her husband's hand had connected with her face, she felt something that might have been hope. 2 weeks had passed since the baby shower from hell. 2 weeks of investigation. 2 weeks of discovery. 2 weeks of learning exactly how deep her husband's betrayal truly went. Evelyn sat in Rachel's apartment, surrounded by evidence that painted a picture darker than she had ever imagined. The documents spread across the coffee table told a story of systematic deception that went back far beyond their marriage. Derek Mitchell had known exactly who Evelyn Harper was from the moment he accidentally spilled coffee on her laptop. The evidence was damning. Howard Crane, Derek's former business partner, had somehow discovered that Victor Harrington's reclusive daughter was living anonymously in Charlotte. He had shared this information with Derek, and together they had orchestrated what appeared to be a random romantic encounter. Every moment of their courtship had been calculated. Every sweet gesture had been strategic. Every whispered promise had been a lie designed to secure access to the Harrington fortune. But here was the thing that confused Evelyn most. She had never given Derek access to her father's money. She had lived modestly throughout their entire marriage. So where had Derek's sudden wealth actually come from? The answer arrived in a manila envelope delivered by one of Victor's intelligence operatives. Maggie spread the documents across the table and studied them with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. Meridian Ventures, she read aloud. A shell company registered in Delaware. Your husband has been funneling money into this account for the past 3 years. According to these records, the total amount transferred is approximately $3.2 million. Evelyn shook her head in confusion. That is impossible. I handled all the household expenses. I would have noticed if that much money was missing from our accounts. You would have noticed if it came from household accounts, Maggie agreed. But this money did not come from your joint accounts. It came from Mitchell Development business revenue. So Derek has been stealing from his own company? Not exactly. Maggie pulled out another document. He has been hiding profit from his company. On paper, Mitchell Development shows modest revenue and tight margins, but the actual income is significantly higher. He has been skimming the difference and hiding it in Meridian Ventures. Rachel leaned forward with her eyes narrowing. Why would he hide money from a company he owns? That does not make sense unless... She stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned. Unless he was planning to claim minimal assets in a divorce while actually having millions hidden away. Exactly, Maggie confirmed. This is textbook divorce asset hiding. He filed those divorce papers at the baby shower because he thought everything was in place. He thought he could claim the company was barely profitable, give you a pittance in the settlement, and walk away with millions that nobody knew about. The betrayal somehow deepened with each new revelation. Derek had not just cheated on her. He had not just humiliated her publicly. He had spent 3 years systematically planning to steal everything. But there was more. Look at this, Maggie said, sliding another document across the table. This is a loan application filed with First Charlotte Bank 18 months ago. Notice anything interesting about the signature on page 3? Evelyn stared at the signature and felt her blood run cold. It was her name. Evelyn Mitchell, signed in her handwriting, authorizing a $1.8 million business loan with their family home as collateral. I never signed this, Evelyn whispered. I have never seen this document before in my life, which means Derek forged your signature, Maggie said flatly. He used your name to secure a loan that you never agreed to. And if Mitchell Development defaults on that loan, you are personally liable for the debt. Rachel slammed her palm against the table. That is criminal. That is actual fraud. We could have him arrested. We could, Maggie agreed. But I think Evelyn might want to handle this a different way first, at least initially. All 3 women turned to look at the pregnant woman sitting quietly in the corner of the couch. Evelyn had been silent for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of her husband's betrayal. But her expression was not defeated. It was calculating. I want to meet with Derek, Evelyn said finally. Face to face. Are you insane? Rachel demanded. The man slapped you at your baby shower. He is probably hoping you will confront him so he can claim you are unstable. I am not going to confront him, Evelyn replied calmly. I am going to negotiate. She reached for the folder containing the evidence and began organizing the documents. North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, Evelyn continued. I can legally wear a wire without Derek's knowledge. I want him on tape admitting to the shell company, the hidden assets, and the forged signature. And if he does not admit to anything, Maggie asked carefully, then at minimum, I have a recording of whatever lies he tells me. Lies that can be contradicted with this evidence. Either way, I win. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon at a neutral restaurant in downtown Charlotte. Evelyn arrived early, wearing a simple maternity dress and a small recording device hidden in her necklace. She had practiced her approach a dozen times with Rachel and Maggie. She knew exactly what she needed Derek to say. He arrived late, of course. Making her wait was a power move. He wore an expensive suit and a confident smirk, clearly expecting his pregnant soon-to-be ex-wife to come begging for mercy. Evelyn, Derek said as he slid into the booth across from her, I have to admit, I did not expect you to reach out. I thought you would hide at Daddy's mansion and let his lawyers do all the talking. I thought about that, Evelyn replied calmly. But I decided I wanted to handle this myself, Derek laughed. Handle what, exactly? The divorce is already filed. My lawyers are drawing up the asset division. All you need to do is sign the papers, and this will all be over. About that asset division, Evelyn said, her voice remaining steady. I have been doing some research, and I am concerned that the proposed settlement does not accurately reflect our marital assets. Something flickered behind Derek's eyes, just for a moment, before his confident mask slipped back into place. I do not know what you mean, he said carefully. I mean that I know about Meridian Ventures. Evelyn watched his face go pale. I know about the $3.2 million you have hidden in that shell company. I know about the loan application you filed with my forged signature. And I know that you only married me because Howard Crane told you who my father was. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap. Derek's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. You cannot prove any of that, he said finally. Actually, I can. Evelyn pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. These are copies, of course. The originals are with my legal team. But I think you will find them quite comprehensive. Derek opened the folder with hands that were not quite steady. As he flipped through the pages, his face transformed from confident to worried to genuinely afraid. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I want full custody of our daughter. I want the house. I want $500,000 in liquid assets, and I want you to sign away your parental rights voluntarily. Derek looked up with genuine shock. My parental rights? You want me to give up my daughter? You were never interested in being a father, Derek. You were interested in having leverage over me. And now that I have leverage over you, that option is no longer available. And if I refuse? Evelyn leaned forward slightly. If you refuse, I take this evidence to Detective Sarah Martinez in the Financial Crimes Division. She opens an investigation into wire fraud and forgery. Your business collapses. Your reputation is destroyed. And you go to prison. She sat back and folded her hands over her pregnant belly. Or, she continued, you can sign the papers I have prepared, walk away with the rest of your hidden assets, and we never speak of this again. Your choice. Derek stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The meek housewife he had manipulated for 3 years had vanished. In her place sat a woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. Fine, he said finally. I will sign your papers. Evelyn smiled. It was not a warm smile. I thought you might see things my way. The custody papers were signed. The agreement was notarized. Evelyn allowed herself to believe, for one brief shining moment, that she had actually won. Rachel opened a bottle of champagne at her apartment that evening. Maggie brought chocolate cake from the bakery down the street. The three women toasted to justice, to sisterhood, and to new beginnings. Evelyn felt her daughter kick inside her belly and allowed herself to imagine the future. A small house with a garden. Lily taking her first steps. Growing up knowing that her mother had fought for her. That future lasted exactly 72 hours. The contractions started in the middle of the night, 3 weeks early, likely triggered by the stress of the past month. Evelyn called Rachel in a panic, and within 30 minutes, she was being wheeled into the maternity ward at Charlotte General Hospital. Lily Harrington was born at 4:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. She weighed 5 pounds, 12 ounces. She had her mother's honey-colored hair and her grandfather's stubborn chin. She was perfect. Evelyn held her daughter for the first time and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she had never known existed. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not Derek, not the divorce, not the millions of dollars and complicated legal battles. Just this tiny, perfect human who depended entirely on her. The hospital room was quiet. Morning light filtered through the windows. Nurses came and went with soft smiles and softer footsteps. Evelyn was just beginning to drift into an exhausted sleep when the door burst open. Rachel rushed in with her phone clutched in her hand and an expression of absolute horror on her face. "Evelyn, you need to see this right now." Rachel's voice was urgent. "Something terrible has happened." She held out her phone with a social media post displayed on the screen. The post was from Brittany Cole's account. It had already been shared thousands of times. The headline made Evelyn's blood turn to ice. Breaking news. Local housewife Evelyn Mitchell is actually Evelyn Harrington. Secret daughter of billionaire Victor Harrington, she has been pretending to be poor while sitting on billions. Her husband Derek is the real victim, tricked into marriage by a lying heiress. Evelyn read the words 3 times before they sank in. Brittany had exposed her identity. Everything she had hidden for 7 years. Everything she had protected. Gone in a single social media post. But the damage was only beginning. Rachel scrolled through her phone with trembling fingers. It gets worse. Derek went on the local morning news this morning. He is claiming that he was the victim of fraud. He says you deceived him into marrying you by hiding your true identity. He is filing a lawsuit for fraudulent inducement to marry. Evelyn's chest tightened. No. He signed the custody agreement. He agreed to the settlement. His lawyers are arguing that he signed under duress, Rachel continued. They are claiming you blackmailed him with threats involving your powerful father. A judge has already frozen the custody agreement pending investigation. The room began to spin. Evelyn clutched her newborn daughter closer to her chest, as if she could physically shield Lily from the chaos descending upon them. There is more. Rachel's voice cracked. Derek filed an emergency motion this morning. He is claiming you are mentally unstable and unfit to have primary custody. A judge granted him temporary visitation rights while the case is being reviewed. Everything Evelyn had fought for, everything she had won, it was all crumbling to dust in her hands. She had thought she was so clever. She had gathered evidence. She had negotiated from a position of strength. She had done everything right, and Derek had found a way to take her own victory and turn it into a weapon against her. The cruelest trick of all is when an abuser cannot win by force. So he wins by story instead. He tells the world that he was the victim, that her money was manipulation, that her silence was deception. And suddenly the woman who was slapped in front of 50 witnesses becomes the villain, simply because she had the audacity to have a safety net she never used. Evelyn stared at the phone screen until the words blurred through her tears. The public comments on the post were vicious. Thousands of strangers were calling her a gold digger in reverse, a manipulator, a liar. They took my narrative, Evelyn whispered. They made me the monster. Rachel sat down on the edge of the hospital bed and took Evelyn's free hand. No, Rachel said firmly. They tried to take your narrative, but you are not finished fighting. We are not finished fighting. But before Evelyn could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. Miss Harrington? A crisp, professional voice came through the speaker. This is Detective Sarah Martinez from the Charlotte Police Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with you about some new developments in your case. Can you meet with me today? Evelyn looked at her newborn daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the chaos swirling around them. Yes, she said finally. I can meet with you. She did not know what new developments meant. She did not know if this was good news or bad news. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to stop fighting. Not now, not ever. The meeting with Detective Martinez revealed that the investigation into Derek's financial crimes was progressing slowly but steadily. Unfortunately, slowly was a luxury Evelyn did not have. Derek's lawyers were moving fast, and she was running out of time. The first catastrophe struck 3 days after Lily's birth. Victor Harrington, watching his daughter suffer from a distance, could no longer contain himself. Despite his promise to let Evelyn handle the situation her own way, he made a single phone call. Just one, to Derek's primary investor. The call was brief. Victor simply mentioned that he had been monitoring his daughter's situation closely and that he hoped the investor understood the implications of continuing to support Derek Mitchell's business ventures. Within 24 hours, Derek's lawyers had used this call as evidence of Harrington family intimidation. The judge presiding over the custody case was presented with testimony suggesting that Victor Harrington was using his wealth and influence to manipulate the legal proceedings. The custody agreement Evelyn had fought so hard to secure was not just frozen. It was thrown out entirely. Derek was granted expanded temporary visitation rights. Evelyn held Lily in her arms and tried to explain to her father that she understood why he had done it. She tried to explain that she was not angry. But the truth was more complicated than that. I asked you for one thing, she said quietly during their phone conversation. I asked you to let me fight this battle myself, and you could not do it. Victor's voice was thick with regret. I watched that man's lawyers attack you on television. I watched them call my daughter unstable. I could not sit by and do nothing. Your something made everything worse. Evelyn closed her eyes against the tears threatening to fall. I know you meant well, Daddy, but I need you to understand that helping me and saving me are not the same thing. I asked for help. I did not ask to be saved. The second catastrophe came 1 week later. Derek's forensic accountant, a ferret-faced man named Richard Polk, had been digging through Evelyn's financial history. He discovered the $47,000 she had hidden away. The money she had saved from grocery budgets and birthday gifts over 3 years of quiet preparation. The judge ordered the account frozen as a potential marital asset. Evelyn sat in Maggie's office and stared at the court order in disbelief. That money was never part of our joint finances, she protested. I saved it from household expenses, cash back at grocery stores, birthday money from relatives. How can he claim it belongs to him? Maggie shook her head grimly. He is not claiming it belongs to him. He is claiming that because it was accumulated during the marriage, it is a marital asset, subject to division. It is a legal technicality, but technically he is correct. So I have no money to fight him with, unless you use your father's resources, Maggie confirmed. Evelyn felt the walls closing in around her. Derek had managed to systematically eliminate every advantage she had built. Her evidence, her settlement, her freedom money, her own father's attempt to help. The third catastrophe was the most personal. Someone leaked Evelyn's postpartum medical records to the press. The records showed that she had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication following Lily's birth. A completely normal prescription for a woman dealing with the stress of a contentious divorce and a premature delivery. But Derek's lawyers spun it into something sinister. They argued that the prescription proved Evelyn was mentally unfit to have primary custody. They demanded a psychological evaluation. They suggested that leaving a newborn in the care of an unstable woman was dangerous. Evelyn watched the news coverage from Rachel's couch, Lily sleeping in her arms, and felt something inside her break. She had tried so hard to do this herself. She had gathered evidence. She had negotiated. She had played by the rules, and the rules had been rigged against her from the start. "I do not know what to do anymore," she admitted to Rachel and Maggie late one night. "Every time I think I've found a way forward, Derek finds a way to turn it against me. He has better lawyers. He has better connections. He has the entire system working in his favor." Rachel exchanged a glance with Maggie. Something passed between them that Evelyn could not quite read. "There is something we need to tell you," Rachel said carefully. "Something that might change everything." Evelyn looked up with exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "What is it?" Maggie pulled a photograph from her bag and slid it across the coffee table. The image showed a woman in her mid-40s with expensive jewelry and tired eyes. She was photographed entering a courthouse in downtown Charlotte. "This woman came to see me yesterday," Maggie explained. "Her name is Caroline Crane. She is Howard Crane's wife." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Howard Crane, the man who had told Derek about her true identity, the man who had set this entire nightmare in motion. "What does she want?" Evelyn asked. Maggie leaned forward with intensity burning in her eyes. "She wants to help you destroy her husband, and she has evidence that changes everything about your case." Caroline Crane was not what Evelyn expected. She had imagined a society wife, pampered and oblivious, married to a con artist without realizing what kind of man she had wed. But the woman who sat across from Evelyn in Maggie's office was sharp-eyed and exhausted and radiating the particular kind of weariness that comes from years of suspicion, finally confirmed. "Thank you for meeting with me," Caroline said. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "You are right," Evelyn replied evenly. "I do not trust you. Your husband ruined my life." Caroline nodded slowly. "I know, and I am ashamed that I did not stop him sooner. But I need you to understand something. I did not know what Howard was doing. Not at first. By the time I figured it out, I was too afraid to leave." She pulled a thick folder from her designer handbag and placed it on the table between them. "But I have been documenting everything for the past 2 years, just in case. And 3 months ago, I discovered something that made me realize I could not stay silent anymore." Evelyn stared at the folder without touching it. "What did you discover?" "Howard and Derek are doing this again. There is a new target, a 26-year-old woman in Dallas. She inherited her grandfather's oil fortune and is trying to live anonymously. They are sending a charming young man to accidentally meet her at a coffee shop next month." The room seemed to freeze around Evelyn, her stomach twisted with nausea that had nothing to do with her recent pregnancy. "They are doing this again?" Caroline nodded. "You are not their first victim, and if we do not stop them, you will not be their last." She opened the folder and began spreading documents across Maggie's desk. Photographs, bank statements, email printouts, audio recordings. "Howard has been targeting wealthy women for years," Caroline explained. "He identifies heiresses who are trying to live normal lives, investigates their vulnerabilities, and then sends in men like Derek to romance them. Once the marriage is established, they begin the process of extracting money and setting up for a profitable divorce. Maggie picked up one of the documents with hands that were not quite steady. This is evidence of a criminal enterprise, wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly racketeering. Why have you not gone to the police? Caroline's laugh was bitter. Because Howard has connections. Lawyers, judges, politicians who owe him favors. Every time I thought about coming forward, I convinced myself that no one would believe me, that he would destroy me before I could destroy him. So why now? Evelyn asked. Why are you willing to help me now? Because of her. Caroline pulled out a photograph of a young blonde woman with innocent eyes. This is Emily Chambers. She is 26 years old. She volunteers at animal shelters and donates to children's hospitals. And in 6 weeks, a man is going to accidentally spill coffee on her laptop and begin the process of destroying her life. Caroline met Evelyn's eyes directly. I could not save you in time, but maybe together we can save her. Evelyn studied the photograph of Emily Chambers. She thought about herself at 25, lonely and desperate to be loved for who she really was. She thought about the hope she had felt when Derek first smiled at her across a coffee shop. She thought about how easily that hope had been weaponized against her. What exactly do you have? Evelyn asked finally. Everything, Caroline replied. Emails between Howard and Derek planning your relationship from the beginning. Bank records showing payments between them. Testimony from 2 previous victims who settled quietly rather than face public humiliation. Audio recordings of Howard bragging about what he calls the Harrington job. Maggie was already making notes on her legal pad. This changes the entire nature of the case. If we can prove that Derek and Howard were operating as a criminal enterprise, the fraud charges become much more serious. We are talking federal charges, wire fraud across state lines. Conspiracy. There is one more thing, Caroline added quietly. She pulled out a final document and handed it to Evelyn. This is a statement from one of Howard's previous victims, a woman named Jessica Morris. She was targeted 8 years ago. She lost her inheritance, her reputation, and her marriage. And she has agreed to testify if we can guarantee her safety. Evelyn read the statement with hands that trembled slightly. Jessica's story was heartbreakingly familiar. The accidental meeting, the whirlwind romance, the gradual isolation, the devastating betrayal. How many women, Evelyn asked, how many women have they done this to? That I know of? Caroline's voice was heavy, at least 4, including you, but there could be more. Howard has been doing this for almost 20 years. I only started documenting after I became suspicious 4 years ago. Rachel had been silent throughout the meeting, but now she leaned forward with fire in her eyes. This is not just a divorce case anymore, she said. This is a criminal conspiracy. And it sounds to me like Derek Mitchell is not just a bad husband. He is a professional con artist. Maggie nodded slowly. Con artists do not go to family court. They go to federal prison. Evelyn looked at the pile of evidence spread across the table. She thought about the months of struggle, the false victories, the devastating defeats, the custody battle that had consumed her life. And suddenly, she saw a new path forward. I want to take this public, she said, not through my father's media empire. I want to tell my story myself, every detail, including the parts that make me look naive and foolish. I want other women to recognize this pattern before they become victims. Caroline's eyes widened. You would do that? You would expose yourself publicly to help women you have never met? Evelyn thought about Emily Chambers in Dallas, innocently going about her life with no idea that a predator was circling. She thought about Jessica Morris, whose voice had been silenced by shame. She thought about all the women who might recognize their own stories in hers. "I spent 7 years hiding who I was," Evelyn said quietly. "I thought that was protecting myself, but hiding did not protect me. It just made me an easier target." She straightened her shoulders and met Caroline's eyes directly. "I am done hiding. It is time to fight back." Rachel's cousin Marcus produced a true crime podcast called Unmasked. It had a modest following of about 50,000 loyal listeners who appreciated deep investigations into fraud and deception. It was not a major media platform, but it was a platform. Evelyn agreed to be interviewed for a special 3-part series. She told everything, her decision to live anonymously. The romantic beginning with Derek, the gradual escalation of control, the baby shower assault, the evidence of systematic fraud. Caroline provided corroborating evidence. Jessica Morris agreed to share her story anonymously. Documents and recordings supported every claim. The first episode dropped on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, it had been downloaded over 200,000 times. The response was overwhelming. Women across America recognized their own stories in Evelyn's experience. The comments section filled with testimonies from survivors who had never spoken about their experiences before. News organizations began picking up the story. Journalists started investigating Derek's business dealings independently. The narrative flipped with stunning speed. Evelyn Harper was no longer the lying heiress who had deceived a good man. She was the brave woman who had exposed a criminal enterprise preying on vulnerable women. Derek's investors began distancing themselves publicly. His construction projects stalled as contractors demanded payment up front. The judge overseeing the custody case, under intense public scrutiny, reversed the temporary visitation order. For one glorious week, Evelyn allowed herself to believe she had finally won. She should have known better. The counterattack came without warning. Derek's lawyers held a press conference outside the Charlotte courthouse. They presented evidence suggesting that Victor Harrington had been bribing judges in the Charlotte area for years on matters unrelated to Evelyn's case. The evidence was manufactured. Evelyn knew it was manufactured, but it was sophisticated enough to appear legitimate to anyone who was not looking closely. Derek's lead attorney, a silver-haired shark named William Prescott, addressed the cameras with practiced sincerity. "Our investigation has revealed a pattern of judicial corruption connected to the Harrington family," Prescott declared. "We have documentation suggesting that favorable rulings in business, matters involving Harrington Industries, may have been influenced by improper payments." He paused for dramatic effect. "Given this evidence, we must question whether any ruling in favor of Evelyn Harrington can be trusted. We are calling for a federal investigation into Harrington family interference in the judicial system of North Carolina." Evelyn watched the press conference from Rachel's apartment with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. The familiar feeling of walls closing in returned with crushing force. "The evidence is fake," she said flatly. "Derek fabricated it." "Of course he did," Maggie agreed. "But proving that will take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, your father's reputation will be dragged through the mud. Every ruling in your favor will be questioned. The custody case will be delayed indefinitely." Rachel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She read it and her face went pale. Derek's lawyers just sent over a settlement offer through back channels. "What do they want?" Evelyn asked. "Joint custody," Rachel read aloud. $5 million. And a public statement from you saying that Derek never intended to harm you. Evelyn felt the breath leave her lungs. "He wants me to lie. He wants me to tell the world that what happened at the baby shower was some kind of misunderstanding. He wants to buy his reputation back, Maggie clarified. The podcast destroyed his public image. He cannot rebuild his business with that video of him slapping a pregnant woman playing on every news channel. He needs you to help him spin it. The room fell silent. Evelyn looked down at Lily's sleeping face and tried to imagine the future. If she took the deal, this would all be over. The lawyers, the court battles, the public scrutiny. She could move on with her life, rebuild, focus on raising her daughter. But she would also be letting Derek win. She would be telling the world that his violence was acceptable as long as the check was large enough. She would be abandoning every woman who had reached out after hearing her story on the podcast. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's name. Evelyn, Victor's voice was heavy with exhaustion. I know what they are claiming about me. The corruption allegations are completely fabricated, but fighting them could take years and cost us everything we have built. I know, Daddy. Take the deal, sweetheart. Victor's voice cracked with emotion. My reputation does not matter. Your peace matters. Your daughter's future matters. I have already lost too much time with you. I cannot bear to watch you suffer through more years of litigation. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her father was giving her permission to surrender. He was telling her it was okay to stop fighting. But every woman fighting a public battle eventually faces a moment when the enemy offers a deal. It looks like peace, it feels like relief, but some deals are just dressed-up surrender. She thought about Emily Chambers in Dallas, still innocent, still unaware. She thought about Jessica Morris, whose silence had allowed Howard and Derek to keep hunting. She thought about all the women who had written to her after the podcast, sharing their own stories of betrayal. No, Evelyn said finally. Victor paused. No, I am not taking the deal. I spent 7 years hiding. I spent 3 years being controlled. I will not spend one more day being blackmailed. We fight. Evelyn, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Evelyn's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I am being more reasonable than I have ever been in my life, because I finally understand that this fight is not just about me anymore. She took a deep breath before continuing. Every woman who survives a difficult situation asks herself the same question. Will I be able to look at myself in 5 years if I take the easy way out? Will my daughter be proud of the choice I made? She looked down at Lily's peaceful face. I want Lily to grow up knowing that her mother did not back down. Not when it mattered most, not when other women were counting on me. Some choices are worth making, even when winning is not guaranteed. Victor was silent for a long moment. Your mother would be so proud of you, he said finally. Then help me fight, Evelyn replied. Not by making phone calls. Not by throwing money at the problem. Help me by trusting that I know what I am doing. What do you need from me? Evelyn smiled despite her tears. I need you to prove that the corruption evidence is fabricated. You have the best forensic accountants in the country working for you. Put them on this. Find the paper trail that leads back to Derek and Howard. Give me ammunition. Consider it done. And Daddy, one more thing. Yes, thank you for believing in me. The courtroom was packed. National media filled the gallery. Cameras waited outside to capture every moment. The custody battle between Evelyn Harrington and Derek Mitchell had become the most watched family court case in North Carolina history. But Evelyn did not rely on her father's army of expensive lawyers. Instead, she worked with Maggie's network of family law attorneys who had volunteered their services pro bono. They were motivated by the justice of the cause and energized by the publicity the case had generated. The evidence against Derek was overwhelming. Caroline Crane took the stand first. She testified about the systematic scheme her husband and Derek had operated for nearly 2 decades. She provided documents, recordings, and financial records that painted a devastating picture of calculated predation. Jessica Morris testified next, finally breaking the silence that had protected her attackers for 8 years. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. She described the same pattern Evelyn had experienced: the accidental meeting, the whirlwind romance, the gradual isolation, the devastating betrayal. Howard Crane, facing federal charges and desperate to reduce his sentence, flipped on his partner. His testimony confirmed everything. He described how he had discovered Evelyn's true identity, how he had shared that information with Derek, how they had planned her seduction like a military operation. The video from the baby shower played on screens throughout the courtroom. 50 witnesses watched Derek Mitchell slap his pregnant wife in crystal clear definition. They watched his mistress laugh. They watched his mother drag Evelyn toward the door. They watched themselves do nothing. Several of those witnesses had been subpoenaed to testify. Under oath, they admitted what the video clearly showed. They had watched a pregnant woman be assaulted, and they had been too afraid of the Mitchell family's influence to speak up. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Brittany Cole had been arrested at the airport trying to flee to Mexico, brought back to Charlotte in handcuffs, facing federal charges for conspiracy and forgery. She was offered a deal in exchange for her cooperation. She took it. Brittany sat in the witness box with her perfect makeup streaked by tears. The confident woman who had laughed at Evelyn's humiliation was gone. In her place sat someone terrified and desperate. William Prescott, Derek's lawyer, tried to object to her testimony, but the judge overruled him. "Miss Cole," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your relationship with Derek Mitchell?" Brittany's voice cracked. "I was his partner. Not just romantically. I helped him hide money. I helped him forge Evelyn's signature on loan documents. I helped him plan the baby shower confrontation." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order. "Why did you help him do these things? Because he promised me we would be rich." Brittany wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He said Evelyn's father would pay anything to make the scandal go away. He said we would walk away with millions and start a new life together. And what happened instead? Instead, he threw me under the bus the moment things went wrong." Brittany's voice hardened. "He told his lawyers I acted alone. He said I had manipulated him. He tried to save himself by sacrificing me." She turned to look directly at Derek, who sat stone-faced at the defense table. "I gave him everything," Brittany continued. "I lied for him. I broke the law for him. I helped him destroy an innocent woman. And when it all fell apart, he pretended he barely knew me." Maggie leaned over to whisper in Evelyn's ear, "You know what I love about accomplices? They always think they are partners, right up until they become witnesses." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took the jury less than 4 hours. Derek Mitchell was found guilty of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The civil court granted Evelyn full sole custody of Lily, along with $4.7 million in assets that Derek had hidden. Patricia Mitchell, Derek's mother, was not charged with any crime, but the social consequences were devastating. She was banned from every country club in Charlotte. Her society friends stopped returning her calls. Her perfectly curated life crumbled around her. Howard Crane received 8 years in federal prison. His cooperation had earned him a reduced sentence, but his reputation and fortune were gone. Carolyn Crane divorced her husband and received a generous settlement. She used part of it to establish a foundation warning women about romance scams. And Emily Chambers, in Dallas, received an anonymous letter warning her about the man who had just accidentally spilled coffee on her laptop. She reported him to the police before he could do any damage. Evelyn walked out of the courthouse into a crowd of cameras and microphones. Rachel walked on one side of her. Maggie walked on the other. Her father waited at the bottom of the steps. She answered a few questions from reporters, but her statement was brief. "I did not do this for revenge," she said. "I did this because other women deserve to know the truth. I hope my story helps someone recognize the warning signs before they become a victim. And I hope it shows that even when the system seems rigged against you, fighting back is always worth it." She declined further comment and walked to her father's waiting car. Lily was at home with a trusted caregiver, waiting for her mother to return. The battle was finally over. 3 years had passed since the baby shower that had changed everything. Evelyn stood on the porch of her modest craftsman-style home, watching her daughter chase butterflies through the garden. Lily was almost 4 years old now, with her mother's honey-colored hair and her grandfather's stubborn chin. She laughed easily and loved deeply and had no memory of the chaos that had surrounded her birth. The house was not large by Harrington standards. 3 bedrooms, a small study, a kitchen that still smelled like the pancakes Evelyn had made for breakfast. She could have afforded a mansion. She had chosen a home instead. Phoenix Rising occupied the converted garage. The nonprofit Evelyn had founded now employed 12 full-time staff and had helped over 2,000 women escape financial abuse. They provided legal resources, financial education, emergency housing, and most importantly, the knowledge that they were not alone. Rachel served as the director of operations. Maggie handled legal affairs. Caroline Crane ran the outreach program, using her insider knowledge of predatory schemes to educate potential victims before they could be targeted. The sisterhood that had formed in the darkest hours had become something permanent, something powerful, something that would outlast any of them. Evelyn's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, the public defender she had been dating for the past year. He knew about her wealth. He did not care. He had fallen in love with the woman who worked late nights helping abused survivors, not the heiress whose father could buy his entire office building without noticing the expense. The text was simple. "Dinner tonight? I will cook." Evelyn smiled and typed back, "Perfect. Lily wants to show you the butterfly she caught." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and watched her daughter play. Sunday dinner would bring the whole extended family together. Victor would arrive with wine from his cellar and stories from his week. Caroline would bring dessert. Rachel and Maggie would bring their sharp humor and endless appetite for justice. It was not the life Evelyn had imagined when she first asked her father to let her disappear. It was better. The mail carrier approached with a handful of letters. Most were bills and advertisements, but one envelope stood out. Handwritten address, prison return label, Derek Mitchell's name in the upper corner. Evelyn's breath caught momentarily, but she did not feel fear. That part of her life was over. Derek was just a man in a cell now. He had no power over her anymore. She opened the letter and read it standing in her garden while Lily chased more butterflies. "Dear Evelyn, I am not writing to ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I am writing because I finally understand what I destroyed. I have been in therapy for 2 years. I have learned words for what I did. Narcissistic abuse, coercive control, financial manipulation. I have met other men in here who did what I did, and I have seen myself in them. It is not a flattering mirror. You were kind to me when kindness was not necessary. You loved me when love was not required. You gave me everything you had, and I threw it away because I was too blind to see its value. I slapped you while you carried our daughter. That moment haunts me every night. I watched Brittany laugh at your pain, and I felt nothing. I watched my mother throw you into the rain, and I thought you deserved it. The person I was 3 years ago was a monster wearing a human face. I am not asking to see Lily. I gave up that right when I tried to sell it for money. I understand now how obscene that was. I understand that some things cannot be bought or sold, and the love of a child is one of them. I want you to tell her someday that her father was not always evil, or if I was, that even evil can learn to feel regret. I want her to know that you fought for her, that you protected her, that you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including me. I will never contact you again. I do not expect a response. I just needed you to know that you were right about everything. And I was wrong about everything. I hope you found the love you deserved. I hope Lily grows up knowing how fortunate she is to have you. I hope my story serves as a warning to other women so that my destruction can mean something. Derek Evelyn read the letter twice. She felt no satisfaction, no vindication, no pleasure in Derek's suffering. She had learned long ago that holding on to hatred was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She did not forgive Derek. She did not wish him well, but she no longer wished him anything at all. He was a closed chapter, and her story was still being written. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She would not respond. She would not preserve it. She would simply let it exist and then let it go. Lily came running across the lawn with something cupped in her small hands. "Mommy, look! A ladybug!" Evelyn knelt down to examine the tiny creature crawling across her daughter's palm. "That is beautiful, sweetheart. What should we do with it?" Lily thought carefully, with the serious expression children wear when considering important questions. "We should let it go," she decided, "so it can fly home to its family." Evelyn smiled. "That is very kind of you." She watched Lily open her hands and let the ladybug flutter away toward the roses, and she thought about all the women she had helped through Phoenix Rising, all the stories she had heard, all the strength she had witnessed. Some women want their abusers to suffer forever. She understood that desire, but she had discovered something different. The best revenge was not destruction. The best revenge was becoming someone he could never control, never diminish, never define. The best revenge was happiness. Marcus arrived that evening with grocery bags and a smile. Victor came an hour later with wine and his characteristic inability to enter a room quietly. Caroline brought a cake decorated with butterflies because Lily had requested it. Rachel and Maggie arrived together, already arguing about a case they were working on. The house filled with noise and laughter and the particular warmth that only comes from chosen family. Lily showed everyone her butterfly collection. Victor gave a dramatic reenactment of a board meeting that had gone entertainingly wrong. Caroline announced that she was writing a book about romance scams, and everyone immediately started suggesting titles. After dinner, Evelyn stepped onto the porch alone. The evening air was cool and soft. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about the woman she had been 3 years ago. Frightened, broken, kneeling in the rain outside a hotel while 50 people who could have helped chose to look away. That woman would not recognize the person standing here now, surrounded by people who loved her, leading an organization that helped thousands, raising a daughter who knew nothing about fear. She had spent 7 years hiding who she was. She had thought that anonymity would protect her, but the truth was that hiding had not protected her at all. It had just made her an easier target for people who preyed on isolation. The real protection came from the opposite direction, from standing up, from speaking out, from building connections with people who would fight alongside you when everything fell apart. Marcus appeared beside her and slipped his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. Evelyn leaned into his warmth and watched the first fireflies of evening begin their dance across the lawn. "I was thinking about how much can change in 3 years," she said. I was thinking about how the worst moment of my life led me to the best version of myself. Marcus kissed the top of her head. Lily is asking if she can stay up late to catch fireflies. Evelyn laughed. Tell her yes. Tonight is special. What makes tonight special? Nothing. Everything. Evelyn turned to look at the warm light spilling from her windows. At the silhouettes of the people she loved most moving inside. Tonight is just another Tuesday, but I finally understand that every ordinary Tuesday is a miracle when you spend it with the right people. They walked back inside together. Lily grabbed her mother's hand and pulled her toward the backyard, chattering excitedly about fireflies and wishes and magic. And Evelyn Harper, the woman who had once hidden her true identity because she was afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons, finally understood what she had been searching for all along. She had been looking for someone who would love her for who she really was. But the answer had never been about finding the right person. It had been about becoming the right person, about loving herself first, about building a life that did not depend on anyone else's approval. Her story had not been about revenge or wealth or even justice. It had been about discovering that her true worth had never depended on anyone's recognition except her own. And that was the greatest lesson of all. Some storms come to destroy us, but the strongest souls learn to dance in the rain, and then they teach their daughters to do the same. Evelyn caught a firefly in her cupped hands and showed it to Lily. The tiny light pulsed between her fingers like a heartbeat. Make a wish, Mommy, Lily whispered. Evelyn thought about wishes. She thought about all the things she had wished for over the years. Love, safety, recognition, freedom. She had found all of them, not because someone had given them to her, because she had claimed them herself. I already have everything I wished for, Evelyn said softly, but I will make a wish for someone else instead. She closed her eyes and thought about Emily Chambers in Dallas, who was now living a life free from predators because someone had cared enough to warn her. She thought about Jessica Morris, who was finally telling her story after years of silence. She thought about the 2,000 women Phoenix Rising had helped, and the thousands more who might find their way to safety in the years to come. She made a wish for all of them, for every woman who was still fighting, for every woman who did not yet know she would need to fight, for every woman who believed she was alone. You are not alone. There is a sisterhood waiting for you. There is strength you do not know you possess. There is a future you cannot yet imagine. And your story is just beginning. Evelyn opened her hands and let the firefly go. It rose into the darkness, blinking its tiny light like a signal, like a promise, like hope. Lily cheered and ran to catch another one. Marcus wrapped his arm around Evelyn's shoulders. Inside the house, laughter echoed through open windows, and Evelyn Harper, who had once been nothing more than a pregnant wife bleeding in the rain, stood in her garden surrounded by love and watched the fireflies dance. She had survived the storm. She had learned to dance in the rain, and now she was teaching her daughter to do the same. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button to share this message with more women who need to hear it. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever had to find strength you didn't know you had? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of survival, justice, and the unstoppable power of sisterhood. Closing statement. This content has been carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring meaningful lessons and inspiration to your life. Every story we share is crafted with purpose, to entertain, to empower, and to remind you that your story matters too.